Health officials advise that you stay indoors as much as possible, and only go outside if absolutely necessary. Now is the time to stock up on whatever is essential, and to stay with your families. Don't cause unnecessary danger to anybody, yourself included. It is also reported that a cure is currently underway, and will be available in vaccination form for the public in the next couple of weeks to month. There will be more news on the epidemic as it comes. This is Johnson Michaels reporting for Channel 15 News.
Marcus leaned forward to pick up the remote off the coffee table, then pointed it at the television, pressing the power button. The image disappeared, leaving nothing but the black void and its reflection in the curved glass screen. They had been showing these kinds of reports for 2 weeks now, and every day the human race seemed to be worse off than the day before, with the constant news about the infected turning into anger-filled monsters, to the CDC stating that whatever this thing was, it was of unknown origin. Marcus had begun to think that maybe nobody in power had any answers at all. That they were just feeding the public what they wanted to hear as not to cause a globe-wide panic attack. Better to control people with lies than have them believe the truth of a dire situation. The thoughts left him as the sound of footsteps started to come down the stairs one at a time. After a couple of seconds, a woman came into view of the first floor, holding a baby in her arms. She completed the walk down the last couple of steps, then raised her head from looking at the floor to him. Opening her mouth, the words came out in a worried whisper. "What's the news?"
No change so far. They still say the cure is being worked on and to go out only when we need to.
The woman sighed and crossed to the corner of the room nearest the television, placing the baby in a crib that had been set up there. After, she sat down on the couch next to Marcus, putting her head on his shoulder. He responded by wrapping an arm around her. "What's going to happen, Mark?" He said the one thing he knew for sure.
I don't know.
Silence lingered over the house as the two of them sat there, staring at the blank television screen for what seemed like hours, each too busy tangled up in their own thought-induced trance to speak to the other. Was this really the end of the human race? He thought that when this species would go extinct, he would long since be dead. His body nothing more than a decomposed pile of dirty bones and half-rotted away clothing. The sun would be on the brink of death, the earth hanging on to that last thread of sunlight before the destruction of its lifeline. The sun would break apart, and the earth would be put into darkness. The planet would endure for a short amount of time before the huge chunks of rock smashed into it. After, the earth would be nothing more than a memory in the face of the universe. It seemed, however, that that situation would not come to pass. Human beings would see the end far beyond their time. All thanks to themselves. The human existence led themselves to their own downfall. How poetic. As the thought struck him, the overwhelming fear that had risen over the weeks temporarily vanished, replaced by an almost uncontrollable anger. It was the human race that did this. Experimenting with diseases and chemical warfare, for what purpose? To see how quickly they could kill a whole country if they waged war? To end that war through the suffering of people for days rather than the sweet release of a nuclear attack? No, they couldn't possibly release something nuclear. It will make the area unusable for tens of thousands of years. Was there a difference between the two? Perhaps there was a third answer also. Was it simply for the hell of it? The people were bored, with nothing better to do with their time than create a concoction that would wipe out the planet in a matter of months. Look at us. We can kill ourselves in so many different ways. Instead of working together, coming up with constructive ways to help our longevity within the rapid changing world, we find ways to kill ourselves. The human race, served up on a plate for the galaxy to see. His anger turned to worry so suddenly that he had barely enough time to register what had just happened as he rushed to the front window to see what was going on. He had been pulled from his thoughts by a sudden sound he could only recognize as a gunshot. "What's going on, Mark? Can you see anything?" He turned his head from the window momentarily, whispering,
"Shh, Jane, I'm trying to see."
The baby had also been woken up by the sound and was now crying with Jane trying to calm her down as best she could. Darting her eyes from her son to her husband, she wasn't sure if she herself was going to go into a state of panic. Her fear was tripled as Marcus finally turned back around and told her where the source of the gunshot had come from.
"Okay, don't panic, but there's a crowd gathered out there, and Joe is among them. I think somebody might have been shot."
"Someone might have been shot? What do you mean? What are you talking about?" She stood up as she said this, beginning to walk towards the window. Marcus stepped in front of her, blocking both her way and the view of the street.
"I'm going out there to check it out. I want you to stay here. Calm the baby down. Don't follow me."
He went to walk towards the front door, but she stopped him, grabbing his arm. "Don't go out there, Mark. You don't even know what the hell is going on. Wait a second. There could be more gunshots. I don't want you getting hurt." Her voice had turned to a frantic plea, and Marcus had to hug her to calm her down.
"I'll only be out there for a little while. If anybody raises a gun, I'll be back in here as fast as I can. I need to check this out."
"No, Mark, please."
"I'll be okay."
"Mark, please." He didn't respond this time. Instead, he made his way towards the door and then opened it, leaving Jane almost beside herself with their son still crying in her arms. Slowly, he made his way towards the group of neighbors that had formed a kind of circle in front of a house down the street. Getting there, he pushed through until what had happened came into view. The things he saw before him were horrifying. The crowd was gathered outside the house of Mr. Lewis. Marcus didn't know much about him, just that he was in his late 30s and worked in the garden most days, regardless of the weather. It seemed that whatever had happened to him had happened while he was doing that very garden work. Laying there was what looked like a man who had taken too many steroids, his muscles blown up and disproportioned, veins sticking out. Not only was the monster-like thing there, but also a woman's headless body, blood pouring out of the neck. It didn't take long for Marcus to spot the head was laying nearby, the features frozen in a shock-like expression. Almost immediately upon seeing it, he felt vomit welling up in his throat and had to clasp a hand over his mouth to force it back down in order not to vomit his last meal out onto the bitumen road. After somewhat regaining control of himself, he spotted Joe on the other side of the crowd and made his way through, walking up behind the man.
"What the hell happened?"
The man turned to see Marcus behind him. "Peter, he was out tending to his garden when, well, I don't know. He just transformed. All his muscles, everything. He just got so huge like a monster. Jennifer came out to see what was going on and, well, he tore her head off." He struggled to get the words out. "After that, Peter, he turned around to face us. That's when James put a bullet through his head." The man couldn't speak anymore, and as Marcus looked around, he spotted a man and a boy, no older than 15, walking down the road away from him. The man was carrying a rifle in the hand at his side, lingering his gaze on the rifle for a couple of seconds, then forcing his head back around. He stared at what had become of Mr. Lewis, and slowly, a realization came upon him. This was how the world would end. Not with a bang, but with a whimper. He woke to the sound of movement and voices. Rubbing his eyes, he sat up and pulled himself out of the sleeping bag. He sat for a couple of minutes as his brain came back from the dreaming world and back into reality.
Shit.
He thought, bringing his hands up to his head.
Get out of there.
He hit himself lightly. It was the third time in a row he had dreamt of the past, his mind trying to sort out the events that had happened 4 months before. He didn't like it, dreaming of her. It always brought him back to the reality of things, the way life was never going to get any better, day after day, year after year. Eventually, pushing the dream to the back of his mind, he reached out to grab the zip keeping the flap of the tent closed. Unzipping it and pushing the flap down, he emerged into the freezing cold morning air. Standing up, he wrapped his coat tighter around him. It wasn't long before he smelt the undeniable scent of cooking meat. It took him mere seconds to pinpoint exactly what it was, but once he did, he couldn't wait to eat it. And sure enough, as he walked over to the campfire, he saw that what was cooking was what his nose had identified it as. Beef was on the menu for breakfast.
Where'd you find the cow?
The chef turned around in surprise, but his facial muscles relaxed as the recognition took hold. He laughed before replying. I wish. No, this is canned beef. Ben grabbed it yesterday when you guys were out on the supply run. Sit down if you like, it's just about ready. The excitement had died some, but Marcus still stepped over the makeshift chair made of a tree log, then sat down on it. He would rather have eaten beef that had been sitting in a can for an amount of time than be starving for the rest of the day.
So how are you going these days, JD?
He asked the cook the question as he watched the sizzling of the beef over the fire. I think I'm okay. Everything is fine. Well, apart from the freezing weather and the killer steroid creatures, but those things kind of just sink into the background when you're as busy as I am. The two men laughed.
How's Allison?
She's good. Pregnancy is coming along fine. Only a few weeks left now. Pretty soon we'll be having to look after a new addition to the camp. It's pretty frightening though, thinking of a child growing up in a world like this. It's really something to keep you up at night. Gives you the thought that maybe it would be better if no babies were born. JD had been looking at the edge of the forest while he had been talking, but as he finished his sentence, he looked over to see Marcus staring at the ground, a look of sadness on his face. Oh, shit, Mark, I didn't mean to.
No, it's okay. You didn't mean anything by it.
He looked back up into the forest before he continued.
And to be honest with you, I'm not sure I completely disagree with you. Raising a kid in a world like this, it's just not right. Making the kid a fighter since the day he is born? You shouldn't have to force the way of violence onto somebody like that. In the end, it's a hard choice.
Silence fell over the campfire. Finishing the cooking, JD cut the beef into pieces, putting them onto multiple plates. He handed one to Marcus, who thanked him.
As much as I would like to see my son alive today, I don't know if I would want to raise him in a world like this.
JD opened his mouth to reply, but was interrupted by another survivor running up to the campfire.
Guys, we have a problem.
What is it, more of those things?
Just follow me, there's no time to explain.
Both men put their plates down and followed the survivor as he ran through the camp. The only thing that Marcus could think while running was the fact that he didn't want it to be a horde. Two of those things were hard to handle when they were together. If they had to face 100 or more, they would have no choice but to gather up everything as fast as they could and evacuate the area. Hoping to get away from the monsters with everybody's lives intact, he hoped to God that didn't happen. They had a good spot here, nearby town to raid for supplies, good water source. Although it was mostly ice at the moment, in the summer months, it would heat back up, and they would have all the fresh water in the world. Nearing the edge of their camp, the fellow survivor stopped running, and whatever it was that he had been talking about came into view. It wasn't a horde, nor was it any of those creatures whatsoever. Marcus was slightly relieved, but he knew by the way it looked, they would have to do something about it, and soon. The survivor had led them to the far edge of the campsite, where a natural cliff formation was located, overlooking an area that was virtually cleared of trees. The view allowed one to see the main road that was a couple of miles away, and beyond into the area of the town which faced the cliff. The advantages of the cliff face allowed them to see any threats that were present on that side of the town, monsters and humans alike.
Well, I think we may have a problem.
Marcus sighed after he finished his sentence and stared down at the road. There, seemingly parked, were multiple vehicles. And what was worse, people were crowded around them, looking straight in the direction of the cliff face.
JD,
Marcus turned to the cook as he said this.
get the guns ready.